Hello and welcome to this panel. My name is Brian McLean, host of Yahoo Finance's The Crypto Mile, the weekly crypto show. Thank you for all attending this discussion entitled Web3 Outlook, Past, Present and Imagination. Our everyday working experience is composed of the past, the present and imagination, of course divided by those dreams that come at night, but that's for a different panel. In today's discussion, we look at the current threshold, looking back at the past to Web 2 and its dominant actors. We also observe the present, looking around at us at ETHWarsaw and the hackathon, and the rest is imagination and the potential for Web 3. Okay, so joining us in the panel is Francesco from MetaMask, and we also have Robert de Groot, the ecosystem manager at Swarm. We also have Polina Yuskov from Ramp Network and Carl Mall, head of sales at Edris. And we also have a guest. Anonymous is coming to join us also.
Hey there.
Okay, a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. So let us begin. I think it's safe to say that for the majority of the public, the Web3, or the word Web3, is still a hazy concept. Elon Musk tweeted last year, "Has anyone seen Web3? I can't find it." So let's turn to one of the panel here and ask the question, Web3, have you found it and what it is, and what is it? Okay, Carl, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions popular in Web3, from my own personal view of this, is that Web3 does not equal blockchain. I think Web3 is more about decentralization and open source and building the integration of the future with much more self-sovereignty over data. Blockchain and crypto are important technological aspects to it, but they are not the full definition. So I think it's fine for Web3 to interact with centralized services, with traditional server hosting architecture, as long as the entire ecosystem is decentralized and open source, integrated, and composable.
Okay, so yesterday we discussed one aspect, very successful aspect of Web 2, which was like social media, and then we were talking about how social media has transformed, and there's certain challengers to those incumbents in the Web 3 world. Does anybody want to discuss another aspect of Web 2 that could be disrupted by Web 3 challengers? Maybe Francesco, do you want to come in there and talk about that?
I just want to say something like, well, on community, because one thing that it's not really there in a Web 2 atmosphere is this collaboration and building things together, and that's what people are searching for, scaling factors, and I think that's what community can provide. Looks at even DAO scalings or anything like user based dApps application, like they're scaling because there is a community behind and there is super supportive builder. So I think that's one thing that we should not underestimate.
Yeah, actually I've been here for a number of days now, and there's not an hour goes past that I don't hear that word community. And does anybody else want to come in there and just underline how important that is to Web3? Robert, do you want to come in?
Yeah, we've seen it all over, of course, here in ETHWarsaw, and the space itself is very supportive in that way. But I must say, with regards to what you mentioned about the growth and with the comparison to Web 2, especially with social media you mentioned, in one of the presentations we saw the chart comparing the growth of Web 3, specifically applications being rebuilt and being adopted, on a similar curve projected over how the growth of Web 1 took place over decades. And with the milestone of a billion users as its goal, and we're not there yet, but we're on track. So the question, I haven't seen, let's say the statement, I haven't seen anything from Web3 yet, is a bit early to say that, I would say.
Yeah, it's like yesterday I had a really good discussion on social media, and that was actually took about 30 minutes of the actual talk. But today I want to throw it out, maybe could we discuss another big industry that might be disrupted? What about looking at the world of film, or content creation in general, music and film? Because we saw music was really disrupted by Napster, and then could we be given ownership back to the creators in a Web3 world? Carl, I see you raising your mic there. Do you want to come in?
So a good friend of mine, so in a very previous life before I got into technology, I was a professional ballet dancer. And I know a lot of people in the ballet world. And I have a friend who recently is publishing his own NFT. Now in the ballet world, any production that you do, there's a choreographer, there's a director, there's a costume designer, there's a lighting, there's whoever's gonna book the theater, there's the audience members. You don't have full ownership over your work. And my friend, Daniel Simkin from Berlin Ballet, he is choreographed it, directed it, helped coordinate the lighting, helped coordinate the filmography, and is self-publishing it. And danced in it. Never before has an artist in the ballet world had full ownership over the production of their art form, except that he's able to self-publish over NFTs. And so I think there's something really exciting there that people are gonna have more ownership over both the production of their art and the distribution of their art in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, because I had heard that we're looking at a Web 2 world, which was an internet of information, and then Web 3 is obviously an internet of value and ownership, possibly. Do you want to come in on that, Robert?
Yeah, I'd like to agree and elaborate on that and with what Carl said. That I've been advising a startup who's working on creating a licensing system on chain, because let's say the corporate industry is one of the least innovative sectors, I would say, over the past 100 years. And it's quite entangled. You give some examples. For instance, in the music industry, you have you got a band, you're making a track, you got a producer, you got a distributor, you got a label. Everyone gets a share. How that's calculated differs per organization, per country, per everyone's involved, and so there's lack of standards per jurisdiction for that, which is also why it's not as transferable as you would like it, perhaps, if you want to license it out to other countries, for instance. And it's one of the reasons, for instance, why in the, let's say, movies and series, why you have one series running on Netflix in one country but not in the other, because licensing issues. Or why, for instance, like a game on Steam gets pulled because the soundtrack isn't licensed anymore. Stuff like that. And there's a lot of room to innovate on that in Web3, and also to make it interoperable. So the startup I'm advising, they're working to create this and to license it into different metaverses, for instance, to make sure that artists can be everywhere if they want to.
That's fascinating, Francesco.
Just want to say, you touched on ownership. I think that's kind of like the basic things that we have in Web3. Plus, we can also give right incentives. I'm really bullish on, for example, music like NFTs with royalties to artists. They're all proportional to views, impressions, and it's really power back to the owners. And we see that also on specific technology. Like we had, for example, with MetaMask Snaps, that you can literally build layer ones extensions. We call it plugins, but are not really plugins. But everybody in the community can build on that. And, maybe in the near future, literally the builders of those extensions can actually profit on that. It's not anymore about hey, you have companies profiting, but it's literally the community building something and receiving something back. So I think
Sorry, I kind of want to play the devil advocate in that ownership part. I think while this really does give power back, are the users, are the consumers of the product willing to pay for it? Because I would love to have more ownership of my art if I were a creator, but that comes with an additional cost to the end user, to the consumer of the product. And as long as they're not willing to pay that, it's not going to be a viable business model, so it's not going to have all of the support and the infrastructure needed to make it work. I mean, Muse, I think it's Muse, they're launching their album as an NFT, and it's going to be a collectible. It's going to be for that narrow population who thinks Muse is still the hottest thing ever, like the hottest thing since sliced bread, and they're going to go for that. But is that really a thing, or is this just a marketing scoop?
I would say that if we looked at the rise of Netflix as an example, or Spotify, is that people are willing to change and to jump into a new business model, to change the way that they handle their media. So why not with this change in Web3?
Yeah, they're already subscribing to Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff like that, so they're already geared up for the subscription mechanism.
Yeah, but it's because it's comfy. It works. Like,
It's comfy, it works, and it was an alternative to an ad-based system before. So, you know, if you remove nuisance, and it's, yeah, there's some costs involved, of course, always, because the world needs to run, then yeah, I think it's quite viable. But,
Well, I think PleaserDAO has a really interesting model for they call themselves, what is it, the People's Louvre, where they collectively come together and then buy the rights to a piece of art. So if instead of having a subscription model, I pay into a community treasury, which then buys the rights to media to then be the subscription. So instead of necessarily paying a subscription model, I pay to a DAO that then has ownership over media that's published into it. So instead of Netflix having to license the rights from Sony in order to play something, instead the DAO that I have an NFT and I'm a member of, so I pay my dues to the DAO and I generate revenue for the treasury in some way, and the treasury itself then gets ownership over the newly produced NFT media.
yes, and that would, my question in this case would work with regards to current legislation. Which entity would then hold the rights? Because that's the current problem right now. You can't give it away to a DAO which has no, yeah.
Well, like all the people who bought Jodorowsky's Dune, but didn't realize that that didn't mean that they owned the rights to it.
Yeah. Well, that we could open that actually up. How do DAOs and how do you actually exit the crypto bubble and you know, make that bridge over to real world assets, and how do DAOs function with, you know, the legal issues in certain judiciaries and stuff like that? Does anybody want to come in on that? Anonymous, do you want to come in on how DAOs can actually bridge and actually function and have impact in with real world assets in the real world?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Thing is that when you look at it, there is can you understand me behind the mask, first of all?
It's understandable, but maybe just say
Okay,
it sort
I'll
of
try to
slowly
do
and
that.
clearly.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe the mic under the...
under the mask.
Personally, I'm kind of skeptical. I'm kind of skeptical because even in democracy, if you look at it, there is a matrix between people that have the skills to understand what is at stake and people that have the time to understand what is at stake. And normally, people that have the skills and the time are a very rare minority. So very few people are actually capable of making decisions and of implementing them. They have the time to vote, to research, to understand, to spend time on the forum. I recently heard someone saying that DAO is douchebags arguing online. So, yeah, if you think about that, it gets very difficult to have the most competent people taking decisions and actually influencing it. And it gets that people that don't have the skills, that don't have the time, are actually a large majority. So, and that's the problem we have in democracy, and that's the problem we have even more in DAOs at the moment. Yes, you can argue that DAOs now are being held, are being run by people that are very highly skilled, but if you take that to real life, and you think of like implementing DAOs as a way of governance, then how can you make sure that, for example, I have no idea about energy, and that is one of the big topics that are being discussed every day by governments. I don't know anything about it. I don't have the time to research about it. Yet, how can I vote on that? And that's why we have representative democracy. That is not perfect, absolutely. And maybe it's not something very anonymous to say, but that is a big problem. And I'm not saying that representative democracy is the perfect solution. I'm just saying that DAOs at the moment, if we don't find a governance solution, we risk representing, mirroring the exact same problems that we have today.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that kind of relates to what Paulina was saying about when we look at, you know, Muse's album. You know, it could just be a marketing, just, you know, an easy way just to sort of ride on the hype, you know, and also, as you were saying, like, you need to have the skills, the time to research what is a DAO and stuff like that. Do you think it's always going to be left in the margins, or whether it's ever going to receive mass adoption?
Well, so kind of talking about like democracy and different governing structures, I'm a big fan of like Sid Meier's Civilization, Civ 6, and right now we're in the stage of, we're really advancing really heavily in Web3 on the technology tree, but we're not building our religion and culture tree. And so, and what that's going to come to, and that's going to answer a lot of the questions for the regulation, the IP, the licensing, is when culture gets built in the metaverse, when culture is produced for the metaverse, then you're not worrying about, you know, I'm not an artist who lives in Los Angeles who gets signed by a label and is my album is produced by a traditional label, and then the licensing somehow gets owned by a DAO. It's, I am working with a Web3 native publishing company and I'm selling the rights to my song directly to, or I'm licensing my rights directly to a DAO ownership. So when the culture is built natively in Web3 and in what becomes the metaverse, then that's going to drive in the adoption to like bolster out the rest of the governing structure.
Well, that does take us on to the metaverse there. Does anybody want to discuss where we're at the moment? Not actually good, honest look at where we're at with the metaverse at this moment in time, Paulina?
Around I think around NFT NYC this year, we hosted a party in the metaverse, and that was the when my team came to me with that idea, I was like, really, are we doing that? And we did that. And of course, it's early stages. It was one of the few parties that were actually held in the metaverse. And that sounds crazy. I managed to attend that, not being in New York during the conference. So I think we're taking some steps towards that. However, I think a lot of people are still perceiving metaverse as something, as a way to keep kids more tied to the computer than they are right now, and not about the cultural movement, not about creating community above geographies, above continents, countries, and so on. And it has the power to let us build cities that are not tied to where you live. We can build governments not tied to where you live. You can build an alternative universe for the communities that you want to be with, that they're not mapping with your country, with your continent, with your where you sit. And I think that's something really interesting there that we could build on. But we still look at that as a fun thing that, you know, the youngest person in the office is gonna come up with, like, let's do a party in the metaverse. And then the old people in the team was like, really? Do we have to? I mean, I'm kind of tired. I want to go to bed. So we really have to think about something other than, you know, just putting on our headset and playing a game. We need to think about metaverse as a place to build communities. And if we can do that, then that opens up a lot of possibilities for new forms of government, new forms of culture, new streams of culture available to us, and just building, you know, beyond that geographical divisions.
I agree. And as much as I'd like to advise anyone to lower their screen time, I believe it is inevitable. Not just, well, I'm an optimist, so I'm not going to say it's due to mass escapism to a digital world where anything is possible. But I do believe that let's say the middle ground would be that we would start with AR, most likely, for which we will need to be able to pay in an environment, we need to be able to store data in the environment to get ready for it. And yeah, well, let's not forget that the original patents for VR technology are over 60 years old. So we've been looking forward to it for quite a while now. Let's say I'm still not impressed by what Mark has been showing lately.
Well, I just sort of, I remember using a VR headset and the whole setup in 1993. So it is actually, and I was invited recently to one of the a function in the metaverse. It was Heineken were releasing their digital Heineken. So everybody went to the Heineken brewery in the metaverse, and you all got like a digital Heineken each that you couldn't drink. And then there was a guy next to me, and you could see him saying, I could hear the voice saying, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of here? And I looked to my left, and there was a guy kind of stuck half in and half out of a wall, and he was sinking into the floor, and he was like, how do I get out of here? And I just said, just turn the computer off. And I turned the computer off, and I went down to the pub, and I got myself a real Heineken.
Well, and so I think one of the things here is touching on the point of how do we increase meaningful metaverse interactions while decreasing screen time. So early in my career, I worked in product analytics, and one of the metrics that people use when building products is literally called addiction. Like how addictive is your product? And that's a KPI that VCs, incentivize, like have an addictive product, how many distinct hours in a day. And really what we should be maximizing is, all right, and because that's built on the very toxic model of ad revenue, which is, in my opinion, the petrol industry of the tech world. It creates such sick incentive structures. And what we really need is the metaverse to be a public sphere, a good public ground where people can have meaningful conversations and meaningful interactions while decreasing the total screen time. So I was reading a really interesting article in the New Yorker recently that was saying the reason that TikTok is eating Facebook's lunch right now is because Facebook's model is that their product is your social network. Facebook won because everyone was on Facebook. TikTok is now winning because they're a content creator. It's such an addictive platform that you can consume so much content in such a short, addictive period of time. We need to kind of move in the other way, which is how do we decrease the level of interactions that people are having? So going to a Heineken brewery when you can't actually drink a beer, that's a high-touch, bad screen time. But if we, have a community forum that has meaningful conversations, that people can have breakout groups, that foster small world connections in global communities, hopefully that's the model that we move forward in. Yeah, but that might not be very profitable, and that's the problem.
What you're saying is that we would need more productive ways of use of metaverses instead of consumer ways.
Yeah.
More information, less noise. More signal, less.
Yeah, more using that as a way to organize ourselves, to virtually meet, to make things happen, to do something, and not just. Having a virtual beer is a very sad thing. It's a very, very sad thing to go. To turn your computer on and to have a virtual beer, and you can't really have a beer while playing that, because that sort of kills the point of having that party.
Another experience I encountered just on interviewing different people that are very heavily involved in the metaverse was people that are actually having relationships and getting married in the metaverse. And the big problem is when they meet each other in real life. Like, it's a very sad experience because it's a complete, it's like a night and day difference.
But we do online dating we've been doing that for a long time, and that's sort of the same thing. What I'm getting at is that it doesn't, using that as a party spot, using Decentraland as a party spot is a huge underuse of that potential. And if we want to make use of the metaverse, we should be building stuff in there. And I'm not talking about just literal metaverse buildings. I'm talking about structures, I'm talking about organizing ourselves, I'm talking about using that technology to build communities on top of communities. And it's the fact that we can have a party is just a perk to that. We can meet, we can have a chat, but you don't have to be in that metaverse all the time. You're just part of the community. You're going out for a walk, but you're still part of the community. You don't have to be at that party all the time. You don't have to be, present virtually all the time, because that's just physically not healthy for us to spend that much time on screen. And I think that that model that you mentioned, that social media is basically advertising, it's and it feeds on addiction. I don't think that would work very well in the metaverse, and I hope it's not going to work very well in the metaverse. Yeah, fingers crossed there. But then again, we need to find a model, because otherwise it's just going to be like a forum. It's going to be like forums that we had way before.
If I can chip in 1 second, I think that the beautiful thing about the metaverse is that it can be inclusive. And being inclusive means that if someone wants to spend the entire day online because they like it, because they can go out for whatever reason, because they prefer that way of communicating, it's not a problem. Like, reducing the screen time is very different when you think as a matter of like, not using the algorithm to control you and to manipulate you in order to like keep on spending time online. So it's more like a problem of data. But then the thing about Web3 is that it not only gives back power to people, but it gives them back freedom. So saying, oh, we need to find a way to increase meaningful conversation while decreasing screen time. If you're tackling it as a business model, maybe. But then that also like we should always consider that we should not bring our own view of the world and impose it over other people. Because otherwise what we're doing is that we're just like being better Facebook, a better TikTok, if we are like trying to still create an algorithm that in a way pushes you towards something. And that's the thing, because that is not inclusive. Saying that we need to increase meaningful conversations and decrease screen times is not being inclusive.
Yeah, I'm worried about that as well, actually. There's the recent working group which was formed about companies working on metaverses to create standards together. I expect, if we look at mention of Netflix and Spotify, basically it's a model in their platform. So you pay and you're not bothered afterwards. That's the idea, even though I heard ads may be coming back. But I expect actually the same with the metaverse, because in this time, these metaverses are not like Web 1 developed as an academic or even the first defense enterprise and then released commercially, which got it flooded with ads and everything. But they're from the ground up built to have a business model. So I'm worried if inclusiveness will even be, let's say, one of the first principles of these metaverses. If I want to, can I go to the metaverse of company X, Y, or Z if I want to? Or am I excluded on some criteria I may not match? If I'm there, can I go to, let's say an employer wants me to apply for a job. Do I need to buy a $400 suit first in that metaverse? Otherwise, I'm not able to go to the application interview or something like that. That's also excluding people on some level. And those are things that worry me for the future.
No, definitely. Like a lot of the stuff that is happening in the real world, that you just mentioned there, that when they do get transported over to the metaverse, they can be accelerated. You know that you've got like a costly NFT suit of $400 or something like that, which I think, just describing what you guys have been saying, there are uses of VR technology that's kind of not just taking real world dynamics and then transporting it to the metaverse, but actually saying, okay, look what we can do with this technology that doesn't happen in the real world. So there's one example is, I think called Isness, and it's basically, as soon as you get the VR headset, you look down at yourself and you become like a nebulous gas, and then everybody else that puts on the headset becomes a nebulous gas. And then what you can do is, when you move closer to each other, your gas mixes with their gas, and it kind of creates this feeling of being out-of-body experience. Now, that's something you can't do in the real world, and it's meant to have, well, research has proven that when people have this experience, they have a kind of a transcendent experience. So I think those kind of use cases are very strong, but when you try to take stuff from the real world and just transplant it to the metaverse, is that a working process that Okay. Francesco, you were going to say something.
No, sure. Yeah, my expertise it's not in metaverses, right? But I think maybe a couple of use cases will work. I don't know, like within 5 years of MetaMask, we did our consensus. We have a consensus headquarter in the Centraland, right? Like since 2 years. Every retreat that we're doing directly in the Centraland. But like sometimes we're just going back to like Zoom calls because they're more efficient. If you're like speaking about extracting the maximum amount of value with like the lowest addiction level, I don't know. My answer is I don't think there are really ways to make that working in a metaverse kind of setup. But there are specific use cases that maybe work. You know, like I see like trading environment work, exchanging masks for like gamings, like virtual real estate sold directly for gaming applications. You know, those are cool things. But for now, right now, it's so early that we're like, what, showing off like the new edition of shoes in the metaverse, where you know virtual people are pushing out blog posts of PRs of screenshots. That's like the maximum things that I see right now. So I'm not that bullish, but I think like specific use case will definitely like be more focused in the next years. Yeah.
Well, we've had a good discussion on the metaverse there, and you know we've all got the viewpoints there. There's things that we're bullish on, things that probably are pretty destructive. You know, you hit on some of those things, Carl. Will we move the discussion on to DeFi 2.0? Does anybody want to come in and just what is that going to look like? What's the next? Like we had DeFi summer 2 years ago, but what next? Anybody want to come in on that?
Maybe let's do only wrong answers. DeFi 2.0, only wrong answers.
The market should stay as speculative as it has been with the full hype machine. That's my wrong answer.
There's a lot of people agreeing to that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, I would expect an increase in on-chain compliance. We've seen it with Concordium, with Aleph. There's enough, let's say, new projects on layer ones as well who try to make privacy-aware solutions which are fitting for business uses as well. Corda as well. Anyway, there's multiple. With, where possible, some form of decentralized KYC. To connect to other applications to build upon and to directly use it. Onboarding of real-world assets is already happening, but I'm talking more in relation to the challenges of the world outside of Web3, as in water will become a commodity which is going to be traded upon it, just to name something, fresh water. And there was another one, which I'll come back on later. Yeah, there was another.
Well, that's a really good discussion point about real-world assets being digitized and tokenization and stuff like that. Does anybody want to else come in on where that's going?
From me, without weighing in too heavily, the tokenization of water sounds like uniquely dystopian to me, in a way that, if we get to water scarcity and being not treating certain assets maybe as public goods, I'm worried about the nature of our current kind of cultural economy of how can I get a profit on anything that is commodifiable. So there's a level, and I'm not saying that's what you were advocating at all, but very, very clear.
Just to underline, Robert was not advocating the tokenization of water.
It's partially already happening, of course, because of this project like Synthetics and others who are representing stocks in the real world, which are part of water purifying companies, for instance, etc. So you see those, you see the depletion of fossil fuels, etc. They're represented in the space, in the finance space as well. So please continue. Yeah.
Not too much about that, but it's a worrying trend for me. That humans, especially in kind of the very Western society, have a habit of if I can commodify it, I can control access to it, and I can try and make a profit off of it in a way that there are 6 different unique climate crises happening right now that are related to droughts and water throughout the world, and with water scarcity, that mixed with the commodification of it that's not a Star Trek world, that's a Dune world.
Yeah, and those tokens probably validated on a proof of work network.
Further causing more problems.
Yeah, just to add to the irony. Does anybody want to come in on synthetic stocks, or Paulina, do you want to come in on something?
I wanted to comment on identity that you mentioned before. I think decentralized identity, it's one of my favorite things happening right now. And happening is sort of weak happening. But right now, I believe that there's such a massive opportunity on the market to seize that, to actually make that work, make that decentralized identity work for DeFi protocols, make it work for wallets, and make it work cross-border, make it accessible and acceptable to regulated companies. For RAMP, I do believe that if something can be accepted by RAMP, it's basically a golden standard within crypto. If we can accept that, that means that that company has nailed the target. And how can we make that happen? So on one side, we have the technical capacity of actually making that happen. So we can use zero-knowledge proofs to make that decentralized identity work. And it's ongoing, it's difficult, you need to build the right sort of, right sets of data, you need to build the right security standards around that. And then you have like another leg of the whole problem, which is the legal, making the legal work. And that's, to be honest, I mean, I think this summer during Permissionless, I met a few people pitching me their product, like, yeah, we're doing decentralized identity. And I was like, yeah, but who's doing compliance with you? Who's doing the legal part? Oh, we're just gonna get a law firm. It's like, oh yeah, that's a really good approach for a massively legal problem. But I think whoever manages to work to figure out decentralized identity, they have it, they're settled for life.
Well, I would like to ask Anon, but that's a bit hard about identity. No, but I think in this space, one thing which worries me is that we may be oversimplifying identity to reducing it to an address. Partially in your space, of course, as well with MetaMask. Maybe you could comment on that about how, because let's say in the real world, we all have multiple roles at the same time. You're a son, you're a father, you're a friend, you're a colleague, etc. So you have a separate LinkedIn profile from your Tinder profile, from whatever. And there's no necessity to combine them, but given we use public chains for a lot of purposes, sometimes things are traceable and combinable, even if you use them for different metaverses or different payment structures. And was wondering, especially in your case, how you look at that, and if you're, how's MetaMask thinking about it, how to serve people who are willing to, let's say, have multiple identities, as we all have in some way.
Yeah, I mean, serving identities, I don't know, I don't know, I personally, I don't know 50 wallets in terms of like specific use case, what you're doing, but I don't know, like there is, I don't know, it's a self-custodian wallet, right? So at the end of the day, everything needs to be transparent. We are literally opening up, like, on a technical level, all the APIs. Like, they are literally working with MetaMask. Everything is open source, and people can build on top of that. There are people, for example, pushing like privacy snaps. So that's literally like private and having like literally like focused private, not underlying, like overlying like technology on that. And I think that's, I don't know, that's one way to go. But like at the end of the day, we are still like maybe exchanging money with our ENS address or something like that. Yeah.
Well, so from Idris, one of the ways we're solving this, so we're a new project and we allow you to connect your phone number, email, Twitter account, and other known off-chain identifiers to any number of wallets. And so 1 out of 20 people that I talk to when I'm like pitching this at conferences is like a real anon who goes, why would I ever want my wallet address tied to any off-chain identifier? And my answer is always, well, have a public wallet and have a private wallet. There's some way in which we need to engage in community. You need to, if you want to engage in services, if you want Web3 to be truly usable, you're going to have to bring some of your off-chain reputation with you. So we do a lot of things where you're able to like airdrop to someone's Twitter account so that you can get on-chain reputation for things that they do off-chain. And so you should have some level of public identity and then some level of private identity. That's one of the nice things about Web3 is being able to spin up a new identity when you want, but also having a way to kind of bridge identity across, get some of the reputation from your Web3 and some of the reputation from your private wallet and some of the reputation from your public wallet to be able to choose which services you want to engage in.
I think to some...
Anonymous, I think, wants to come in there. Yeah.
So, taking from what Carl would say, things that can you actually be free if you're not anonymous? Because in the moment where what you're doing is public and it's not private, you're immediately, you're immediately influenced by what other people might think of you, by what other people might do or might say. So if you don't have complete privacy, if you're not anonymous, then you can kiss freedom goodbye. And thinking that freedom is the most important thing we have. So in that way, having a system that allows you to keep your transactions private, that allows you to make sure that whatever you do, when you want to be private, can be private, is a system that allows you to be free. And it's not a matter of, oh, if you don't do anything illegal, then you don't have to worry about it. That's not the thing. Because you can do whatever you want. You can do like very legal things and still want to be private. So you can't say that. So for that very reason, you need to have extreme privacy. It is a core value. It is like one of the principles that we have right now. It is one of the most important battles that we need to fight as of today. And you can't give up on that because it's giving up on your freedom.
I think your identity is also something you own, and you have the right to share it when you want to share it, and you have the right to keep it secret when you want to keep it secret, and that decision is should be entirely up to you. So what I would love to see is the system that allows you to have like an identity share scale. So if you want to share your Twitter account, you can do that. If you want to share your social profile, you can do that. If you want to share your KYC data, you can do that. You're allowed to share your data. But right now, we're not allowed to share our data. We're required to share our data. We have no control over who gets our data. And I am working on the cross-section of the finance and blockchain. I see that very well because we're forced to comply with the regulations. We have to comply with the regulations. And they are requesting us to take the data. And not everybody wants to do that, and that's obvious, and that's understandable. So I would love to have the option to decide whom I share my data with. I would love to have, instead of submitting an ID, I would love to have just a zero-knowledge proof of I am who I am. You accept the KYC standards that my provider has. You accept my profile. You accept that I'm not on the sanctions list, whatever, and I can use the service without disclosing who I am. And I would love to see that.
And so one of the big problems with Web 2 as it is right now is it's fragmented. Your identity is fragmented when you don't want it to be fragmented, and it's consolidated when you don't want it to be consolidated. Like all the people that can go out and buy my web browsing history and all those data consolidators that are, aggregating my credit score, where I grew up, all this like off-chain data about me, and I forget the name of these providers. John Oliver did a bit about them recently, but you can buy so much information that's being consolidated about me behind the scene. And then if I want to apply for a loan, if I want to apply for this, some of these services demand a holistic view of my identity. And there are certain things, one of the things that excites me in DeFi is some of these lending platforms. Maybe it's enough that I have such a good reputation across 5 DAOs that I've built up over 5 years. Maybe I can just expose to you my DAO reputation, and that's enough for me to get a loan. You don't need to know everything about me. You don't need to know my parents' credit score. You don't need to know what my previous thing was if I've built up a reputation on a certain subset. On the other side, we've got WhatsApp, Telegram, Twitter. We've got all these off-chain identities that makes it really difficult to share information outside of all these different ecosystems. So it'd be great with one of the things that we're trying to build is being able to take information from one protocol to another, regardless of which identifier that you're using. That's the nice thing about wallets. So even if I have 5 of my off-chain identifiers tied to one wallet, I could easily do wallet-to-wallet messaging with someone else, regardless. Maybe I know their Twitter handle, but it goes to their SMS.
Yeah, Pauline, you were describing self-sovereign identity management. I believe that's a term to coin it. there's a bigger problem with regards to these fragmentation of your off-chain data, is that companies are not protected. So companies can they can resell your data if they want to, if they're allowed to, with regards to the terms you sign for, or they can license it, or or they can aggregate it, and then but any privacy-aware company might still be bought out. So as long as we don't make it a best practice, or a practice at least, to put in a poison pill in your company, for instance, to prevent that, to give your users ownership of their data at the company when the transfer may take place, we'll still be stuck with this problem. Yeah.
And one of the ways to protect that is through open source and through licensing. So if I publish my service under GPL v3, for example, it's very difficult to change the software license from that once it's been published.
True, I was thinking more of let's say, if you have decentralized, public, transparent data lakes which you can aggregate. So as an example, in this case, there's already thought of this. Somebody's building this, and where you could store it, and where the data is indeed, like you mentioned, you just have to know, okay, is this person viable to, is he old enough to buy something, is his credit history okay, I don't need to know where it comes from, etc. And there are I know open source incubators are helping companies, startups, to integrate this, like sort of a golden ticket into their charter, actually, to prevent this, which I love, and which I think should be a part of what we're trying to promote within our communities if they're building open source tech. But, yeah.
Okay, well, we're now run over time, folks, so the members of the audience, does anybody want to come up with any questions for the panel? Any questions from online? No. No? Okay, well, this has been a wonderful chat about Web3, and I'm sure we could chat all night. But thank you very much, everybody, for turning up, and a round of applause for everybody that's turned up on the panel today. Thanks. Thank you, and safe home.
Thank you.